What's going on, fellas? My name is Matt and welcome back to the channel. Today, guys, I got an awesome video for you going over some projects I think you guys should buy on every single dip. So these are projects that, hey, you know what? If you're looking to ape in, there is never a better time than a dip, and they're likely going to return to one of their previous highs. So if you guys are new, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and let's get right into it. So we got to keep in mind, guys, there are a few different metrics I'm using for this video. The first thing, obviously, is whether or not these projects were simply pump and dumps or have a quality community. That's the first thing we have to look for every single time, because in a lot of instances, especially with certain DAOs and maybe some smaller scale projects, we end up running into the issue of pump and dump where people just buy them up immediately, list them all once they get to the top, and then they never come back. This has happened with so many NFTs in the past, so our goal is to avoid this and find quality communities that have lasted through bear markets and will be here in the future. Another thing to keep in mind is ratio of activity and whales. So we have to find a project that has enough whales in it, people with mega bucks, ultra money that are buying a ton of them and holding a ton of them. This is less likely to cause the project to crash, given the fact that these people want them to eventually go back to a higher price. So enough whales are very likely to sweep the floor and to give you an opportunity to make some profits, hopefully, if you enter at a low spot. But again, it can't be too many whales that control too much of the supply, otherwise they'll just dump them. So you want to try to find a good ratio of whales to holders, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the video, but let's get into our first project. So the first project I wanted to talk about is Primates. I feel like Primates is a very good example of ratio of whales to average just people who buy maybe one or two of them. So Primates right now is sitting at a floor of around 17. Now you guys will notice that when we take a look at the activity, it is of course great. There is a ton of activity going on with this project, but recently, in recent time, they were sitting at a floor of 30. So how can we ensure that Primates are going to hit that in the future? Well, first off, it's safe to say this is not just a cash grab pump and dump, because there are 5,300 owners. So there are 5,300 people that actually own the 10K supply of Primate. There are around 2,000 listed, which is a lot. That's definitely not a great thing. I'm not going to act like that is. But when we take a look at analytics, you guys can see they actually have data here on Magic Eden about who owns what. And you guys will notice there are a lot of wallets here that you guys can see own well over 40 Primates. And you can see based on the number of holders, there are around 4,000 people who own one of them, which is definitely good to see. These are people who are not rich, but you know, the average guy like myself who just has one Primate. Then you guys can see there are a ton of people who also own between 2 and 5, which is always good. But here is where the big boys come into play here. 6 through 24. There are over 150 people here who own between 6 and 24 Primates, and 15 people who own between 25 and 50. 7 people own over 50. So that is unbelievable. And when you add this all together, these people, there are, you know, a little under 200 people here that have some mega bucks that are willing to drop that on making sure Primates does not drop to 0. You guys can also see that the Twitter community for Primates is extremely strong here, 275,000 followers. Discord is wildly active as well. Constantly people tweeting at them, a lot of profile picture usage, and if you wanted to look at some kind of analytic data, there are also websites that track how many people are actually representing a project on their profile picture, which is always a great idea to do as well. But before we go any further, do you like NFT whitelists? Because if you do, the Patreon down below is the place for you. I have worked tirelessly to make the Patreon one of the best places you guys could be for NFTs. For only $10 a month, we have an entire team dedicated to finding you whitelists. You guys also get one-on-one access to me, group coaching calls, and so much more. To be honest, guys, it is a steal for the price it's at. If you're looking to take your NFT game to the next level, you guys have to check out the Patreon down below in the description. The next project I wanted to talk about here is CETS on CRECK, which right now is sitting at a floor of around 50. And CETS on CRECK in the past has sat at 80, 90, 100 SOL. And honestly, I do think we will return to that point one day. Most of all with CETS on CRECK, the things that I notice is that this never really dies on social media. There are always people who are representing a CET as their profile picture, especially a lot of large tier Solana influencers, and definitely that is a strong sign. And similarly, of course, with Primates, like I talked about before, Primates in the past has sat at around 30 SOL. It is extremely likely that in the future, Primates will go from the 17 SOL it's at right now to 30, because there are just too many people vested invested in it to let it go lower. When it comes to CETS on CRECK, my opinion is that right now sitting at 50, there are too many people who are vested in watching this go into 70 or 80 to let it just flop and linger at 30 for the end of time. And actually, I made this call over on my Patreon when I picked up a CET at around 44 or 45. So I've already made a little bit of money on my CET pickup, and of course that could fluctuate, but I was definitely talking about this project well into the 30s because I felt like this was a very, very strong community. So you guys can see 4,200 individual owners. That is pretty good. Definitely a lot of people who are well vested in the project, not just a handful that are controlling all the supply. Yet the supply itself is 7,000 with only 295 listed. That is bonkers. That is an extremely low amount listed, especially for a project with a high supply like this. So you guys can take a look at the activity here over the past 24 hours. It is not particularly crazy, but then again, there are not a lot of listings. So when we take a look at analytics, of course, you guys can see that when we take a look at the way these listings are distributed, the majority of the CETs are listed between 65 and 70. So there actually aren't a whole lot between the 50 and 55 floor. Also not a whole lot between the 50 and 60 floor when you add it all together. So there are a lot of these listings that are actually very high. So when you take a look at the fact there are 295 listed, it's probably a little bit lower than that, because who's going to go and buy a CET for 150? Pretty unlikely. You know, most people aren't going to spend that. And same thing with DGods. If you list a DGod for 1,000, who's going to buy that for 1,000? Not a lot of people. So I don't really count that as a listing. It's really more like a holding that you're just publicly displaying to the world. So definitely nice to see that going on with CETS. And when it comes down to the ownership, of course, you guys can see there are between around 1,000 people here that have between 2 and 5. So that's not bad. But here we go. We got a few whales here owning between 6 and 24. Not a whole lot of people own over 25, which in a way, maybe that can be concerning to some people. You know, you look at a project like OK Bears or DGods, there are a lot more people who own over 25 of them, but regardless, I still think CETS on CRECK is definitely a good project to look at, and certainly will hit 90 again in the future, in my opinion. Another project I love buying on the dip is Famous Fox Federation. Right now, the floor around 30, that seems like a no-brainer in my opinion right now, given the fact that they basically do have some of the coolest features available, including a raffle system and the opportunity, of course, to purchase whitelist spots for upcoming projects. And once the next Solana bull run comes, I think a lot of people will be wanting to go ahead and purchase some whitelist opportunities for future projects. So definitely nice to see Famous Fox here still hanging on above 30, but I certainly think they will hit 50 or 60 again in the future. Same thing, very low listed here, 266 listed out of a 7.8 thousand supply. That is unbelievable. And of course, when we take a look at the analytics here on the project, you guys will note that if we take a look at the amount of holders, there are again a good deal of whales here who own over 6 of them, not a whole lot that own over 25, so definitely something to consider. But again, you guys can take a look at their Twitter. These guys are pretty much the real deal. Here is their second roadmap, which I actually posted back in March, but definitely still going hard with the raffles and the auctions on their site, and they really seem to be one of the best options to do that. So they're raffling off some Duppies whitelist spots, which of course is the new collection from DGods. So these guys are always working on something, and they also have some variants of their collections, you know, the trans-dimensional Fox collection and all of that. So definitely a lot of opportunities here to get involved in Famous Fox Federation that I definitely do think has a lot of room to grow. And the final project here, probably the all reliable when it comes to dips, is OK Bears. Anytime this project goes below 100, in my opinion, it is basically a buy signal, and every time it goes to 130, 140, 150, it is basically a sell signal. This project has behaved with the exact same trend in probably 5 to 10 instances. I have literally watched this project head down from 130 down to like 90 multiple times. So OK Bears right now, you know, probably around neutral as to whether or not you would buy or sell, but definitely look for when they are around 80 or 90, because OK Bears always seems to rocket every time that happens. We have a 10,000 supply with 814 listed, which certainly is not a low amount, but if we were to take a look at the listing distribution, that is where we'll get most of our information. So you guys see the majority of them are actually listed between 196 and 201, which is pretty weird. because who is spending double the floor price on an OK Bear? Again, not a lot of people. So can you really count this as a listing per se? Not quite as much. I mean, when we think listed, we're thinking things at the floor, things that people are just trying to get rid of, not things that people are selling for an astronomical amount and sitting here and saying, hey, look how much I'm selling this for, you'll never buy it. You know, that's definitely not something that I really consider to be a listing, really. So when we look at listings, we're trying to think of resistance. We're trying to think of what the buy volume has to fight against in order to grow. So when I look at this graph, I'm definitely noticing that 115 to 120 looks to be kind of the spot. There's an awful lot of bears here listed 110, 114, 114.1, 115, 115, 115. The whole list is filling up at 115. So that is kind of the resistance that we are fighting against. And as we scroll through, you guys will note that there are definitely some sort of gaps in where the price is changing. So 145 through 150 looks to be a pretty big, thick sort of resistance to fight through. But the point behind all of this is that OK Bears almost always has a moment when it surges from 100 to 130-ish. And definitely, if you have the funds for it, I think OK Bears is probably a safe bet when it comes to that. So again, definitely do take a look at the listings distributions, see sort of how this is evolving, where the greatest resistance is. So if OK Bears right now randomly surged to say 190, I would probably be leery about buying it, given the fact that there are 38 listed between 196 and 201. So that's kind of the thinking that I want you guys to have when looking at things like this. But definitely with OK Bears, you guys can see there are a good deal of whales here. 17 people who own more than 25 of them, which is crazy. 6 people who own more than 50 of them. But definitely the real shining star here, the fact there are over 1,000 people who own between 2 and 5. So not whales per se, but definitely people who are keeping this as a large part of their portfolio. So with that being said, folks, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed. If you guys did, make sure to drop a like, subscribe. Let me know which project down below in the comments, of course, you guys like the most. Make sure to check the Patreon. Again, the content for the month of July is unbelievable over there, guys. Truly one of the greatest deals out there, in my opinion. Thank you guys so much. I always appreciate it. And again, the Patreon does help support me in the channel. It means a lot, guys. So much love. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.